Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video, I like to discuss the continuing incompetence of this Brexit government's response to the serious worker shortages, including a damning attack from the boss of clothes retailer Next. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So, I suppose a few things to discuss here. I'd like to start off with a very short piece. It was a short piece on the Daily Telegraph. Which, yes, that's the paper I discussed yesterday, as publishing an article saying that the Brexit concept was fine. Oh, yeah, there's nothing wrong with Brexit, really. It's just that Boris Johnson is bungling it. And I think we can take it as read that the Telegraph has firmly decided that Boris Johnson needs removing, and they are publishing articles accordingly. Because in this one, they explain that the boss of Next is worried about the government's lack of any coherent plan for Brexit. The paper goes to pains to explain that Simon Wolfson is very calm, he's not given to just flying off the handle, and they actually spend most of the article citing his qualifications as a retail expert. Well, the reason I call it a short article, it's because they spend most of it just, I think it's conscious of the fact that there are so many so-called experts exulting on different aspects of Brexit, including me, I'm not an expert, that they need to justify their source on this occasion. Oh yeah, this isn't just, lots of papers will say we've got this business expert. This is actually a business expert. This guy knows what he's doing. So they spend quite a lot of the article just explaining how good he is. Fair enough. But then they report that he pointed out that the HGV crisis wasn't only foreseen, but that it had been building for months. Which is true on both counts. Like, if I could have talked about it before Brexit even happened, before we even left the EU, that's because it was known. And it's also the case that this thing was building. It was getting worse long before we reached the tipping point whereby the media had started talking about it. You know, I was reading people who knew about these things before it happened. Then in January, I was reading, oh, now this has happened, and it's going to, and you know, they were explaining how this whole chain of events was going to happen. But it wasn't until, what was it, about June or July, before you could point to something that an ordinary member of the public would go, oh yeah, I can see that as well. But it had been building for all this time, and the government did nothing at all throughout. They only recently started to put any policies in place at all, and those, of course, are too little, too late. I mean, let's go through some of the things the government are doing. So they've been, lorry driver shortage is the crucial one. There's shortages in lots of sectors and it's going to affect all sorts of things. The lorry driver shortage is just compounding everything. So the government have been writing to anyone they think might be qualified to drive a lorry in order to appeal to them to return to the profession, or how would you like to do some driving? Now, I'm not going to attack that move in itself, because after all, why not? We're in desperate need of drivers. Why not take a punt at trying to persuade a few people who may have left the profession? Because that's their target. You don't randomly get an HGV license. If you have one and you aren't using it to drive a lorry, it's because you intended to do that when you got the license, but something put you off. The long hours, the lack of family life, the crap pay, the threat of prison if you're tired. Any of the other myriad of reasons not to drive a lorry, especially in Brexit Britain. And this has resulted in people receiving these letters who are not, of course, going to be tempted. The vast majority are not going to be tempted. But, you know, if you get a few from it, why not? But there was one particular bizarre example. You may have seen it. There was last week, one of the funniest ones I saw was a paramedic getting the letter. As if the government would rather deprive our NHS of even more resources to cover up a few bad headlines. Obviously, that's not the case. They're not going to go through each addressee individually. They've just fired off letters left, right and centre. But it culminated in a report in The Independent that was explaining that government have even been writing to thousands of Germans living in the UK if they would like to drive lorries for us. So these people have never driven a lorry before. Because the real bonus is, the letter notes that if you're German, and you obtained your driving license before 1999 in Germany, I assume, it includes an entitlement to drive trucks up to 7.5 tonnes. Now, consider that. The government are willing to try and attract people who are merely qualified to drive delivery trucks. The fact that they would have no experience at all doesn't seem to matter. You have a piece of paper that says, in theory, you are certified to drive a delivery truck, means that we'd really like you to do that. I mean, if that's not an act of desperation, I do not know what is. If that is not a clear sign that the government have no plan, and that is the point of this, the government don't have a plan to solve this problem. It's not just that they're too slow with it. They don't actually know what to do. Because how else can you explain firing off? You can sort of understand firing off letters to people with HGV licenses. You obtained it at some point. You must have wanted to be a driver. You've left the profession. You know you're not going to track most of them back. There was a reason they left the profession. But maybe you can get some. Why not? If you're firing off these letters to people who've never, I mean, not qualified to drive a lorry, but say a delivery truck, you know, for groceries to deliver to corner shops or so on. Okay, fine. If you've never driven one of those, they're writing to people they know have probably never driven one of these things. They just happen to be qualified. That is an act of desperation. And you know, although I alluded to the fact that people weren't driving trucks, lorries or tankers right now, that suggests that, you know, as I say, they've got a good reason for that. If you're an EU citizen living in the UK right now, you're working. The reason why, you know, it's an extra act of desperation writing to these German citizens. If you are an EU citizen in the UK, you're not scratching around for work. Otherwise, Priti Patel would have had you kicked out of the country by now. So, the chances of attracting someone who's already in decent work to do a crap job is like ridiculous, surely. If people are qualified or even experienced to drive trucks, lorries or tankers and they're not doing it, it's because there's a reason for that. You know, if it was purely a matter of poor pay and that's improved, well, I mean, even then it wouldn't need a letter from the government, would it, to tempt you? Because the news has been banging on about this for some time. You're aware of it. But for everyone else, you know, those who found better employment that allowed them to keep their health, see their families, have some free time, presumably want to retain those benefits. They're not going to get them with driving, are they? And I think this is why retail bosses, as well as any other captains of industry, are rightly concerned. The government did nothing at all to tackle the crisis when it was still on the horizon. Now that it's here, it's too late to do anything and solve it overnight. Of course, they'd understand, okay, well, we are where we are. Let's be pragmatic. We are where we are. As long as they do something, it'll eventually sort itself out. But they're not. What they're doing is too little, too late. Christmas is going to be impacted by these Brexit shortages. For those who think that that is important, that is clear. There are some problems that simply don't have solutions that you can implement in time. But I think what is of concern to these businesses is that there are also some solutions that the government simply won't countenance. Not can't do, won't do. I saw someone tweeting that they wouldn't be surprised if this Conservative government took us back into the customs union single market. I would be amazed. I don't see any way of the government ever doing that. I can see a future where the Conservative Party accept that Brexit was a mistake and are once again the party of Europe. They still won't blame themselves. They'll blame the public still, as though the public voted for it. But, you know, I can absolutely see them coming around to the fact that it was a huge mistake. I can see the time when European membership becomes completely apolitical, a completely non-partisan issue in this country. But not until the current Conservatives have been sent packing. And even then, it'll take a while. You know, they're the Conservative Party, you know. They don't like change. They're not going to change. Going back to that Telegraph article, it asks what the hundreds of mandarins in the Treasury and the Department for Transport are doing with their time. It was implying that why weren't they telling ministers about all these problems coming up? What were they doing? You know, the Telegraph should know the answer to this one. Boris Johnson doesn't like people who sound caution against his insane plans. Naysayers, he calls them, doommongers. He only likes people who are optimistic about his particular brand of madness. That you can do what you want if only you believe enough. As far as Boris Johnson's concerned, he had to do a thing to gain political power. It is up to the officials to decide how it can be implemented. Hence, there are fewer actual experts in government departments. Experts aren't wanted if they're going to keep banging on about reality. So they don't so much have mandarins as lemons painted orange. It's not that ministers weren't warned about all these crises either. It wasn't that they weren't informed. The paper also cites the energy crunch, the third lockdown last winter, the exams fiasco. You know, they could have carried on. Ministers knew about all of these things well in advance. They either just didn't care or didn't believe it was going to be a problem. I can accept that. I can accept that they just didn't believe what they were listening to. But they were informed. And when it comes to the lorry driver shortage, I don't know whether the government were deliberately putting off action for as long as possible so as to avoid having to admit that they knew Brexit needed emergency planning. You could get that before Brexit. If the government put a load of these emergency plans in place, people would say, why do you need emergency plans when Brexit's going to be so great? So I don't know whether they were just putting it off because of that or because they genuinely thought that all the warnings came from Remoaners banging on about Project Fear. What I do know is they did get those warnings. The warnings were made publicly enough as well, so everyone else got them. No one gets to say that they didn't know about this, which is how I knew of the problems long before they became undeniable. I don't work in the supply chain. I have to listen to people who do. But amongst all the noise, coming out of government, other political parties, the media and actual experts, what I'm no longer hearing are solutions from anyone. Because it's one thing when there are solutions for the problem that the government will not accept. We can consider those solutions to be politically impossible. That includes anything that would be a reversal of what Boris Johnson claims to be the will of the people. Anything that contradicts that will not be implemented while he is in charge. This is why when they U-turned on the visa for lorry drivers and then on the quiet other shortage workers in food production especially, butchers the latest one now, we'll go visas for butchers. In an act of pure spite, they limited them to a 3-month period. It's like, okay, you can have your visas, but only for 3 months, which renders the U-turn pointless. Businesses cannot use a 3-month visa because it will not attract foreign drivers who are already qualified to drive on our roads, and it is not enough to get drivers from further afield qualified for British roads. So it's no solution at all. It doesn't actually help them get any drivers. And that's what we have now, no solutions. The reason that the government aren't doing anything is because they can't do anything. Their ideology prevents plausible solutions, which means there are no solutions at all. Hence why Germans who've never driven a truck in their life are being asked to deliver tons of bread around the country, and the boss of another retail giant is despairing at the future of the country. It's because people are waking up to the fact that it's not just that the government aren't doing enough, they're not doing anything because they can't do anything. There is no solution that the government would consider politically acceptable. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.